Next, Clea Sarnquist, who's a senior research scholar in the Global Child Health Program, and got her seed funding, indeed, from that program as part of the Global Child Health Equity Seed Grant Award, and is going to talk to us about something completely different. Yes. Clea.
So I think this, this combination of talks actually really speaks to this umbrella that Mary talked about this morning, that so many things, right? We're all working on so many different things, but getting support from the Maternal and Child Health Research Institute. So we're really pleased to be one of the inaugural seed grant recipients for this work. And we're going to talk a little bit about mental health in adolescents, so we're switching from infants to adolescents, in the informal settlements in Nairobi, Kenya. So I'm going to take a minute to set the stage because I'm assuming not all of you are familiar with this particular setting. So the informal settlements are in Kenya are very large, several 100,000 people living in very small amounts of space, so very dense. They're characterized by, as you can see, kind of buildings are made of found materials, homes are made of found materials, not a lot of security, which is important for our work, not a lot of locks, not a lot of lighting. You can see open sewers, dirt floors, etc. Air quality, unfortunately, you're all experiencing today something similar to probably an average day in these environments. So not very healthy environments to be a young person growing up. So the age group that we work with, they were about 10 to 12 years old when we started 2 years ago, and now they have aged to be about 12 to 14 or 15 years old. So just this is a group of girls in one of the schools we're working in, and this is a group of young men in one of the schools we're working in. Young boys, and you can see again the schools, it's a mud and stick school, right? So again, we're seeing this is a very impoverished community. So the seed grant we got gave us the opportunity to add some additional measures onto an existing cluster randomized controlled trial. So as I mentioned, we've been working for 2 years with 94 schools in 5 different settlements in the Nairobi region. And if you've seen the Constant Garden, or Kibera is one of the settlements we're working in. And so we have, like I said, 94 schools, about 4,000 girls and 1,000 boys enrolled in that larger trial. So it is quite a large trial. And this gave us the opportunity to add on, like I said, mental health measures just at the end line data collection, so 2 years in. Just so you know a little bit about the intervention we're doing, the larger project is focused on sexual assault prevention. And I know some of you have heard myself or Mike Bayoki talk about this, but I'm going to tell you just a little bit. It's a classroom-based intervention on school grounds after school. It's 12 hours, 6 weeks, 2 hours a week, and it's a very interactive kind of session. It's very engaging for these young people. So there's 4 main pathways. We teach both the boys and the girls separately, but at the same time and with kind of a shared language about kind of what they're learning. So the girls, there's an empowerment pathway. I have the right to defend myself. And again, remember the overarching thing here is the sexual assault prevention intervention. I have the right to defend myself. I can defend myself. Situational awareness ranging from if someone offers you a bag of chips to go into a dark alleyway, that's not a good idea, to behavioral things like controlling behavior and recognizing some of those kinds of cues. Verbal skills ranging from, I see my mom over there, I have to go, to no, right? Very wide range of skills that they can use to get out of a bad situation. And then finally, we have physical self-defense skills. This is feminist empowerment self-defense. It's very focused on breaking holds and getting away safely. So what does this look like? It looks like very, very young, near-peer trainers who have a lot of experience in these communities. Most of them are actually from the communities they're working in, providing this very exciting training to these young people and really engaging them, and a lot of hands-on practice as well. So for the boys, healthy gender norms. So things like they focus a lot on how do you treat your mother, how do you treat your sisters, how does that apply to other women in your life? Positive masculinity, which has a very wide range of things from sort of just an exploration of what kind of man do you want to be, what are the men in your community you look up to, and beyond that. And then bystander intervention, again, ranging from if you see someone drop 1,000 shillings, do you pick it up and give it back to them, to if you see someone really in a dangerous situation, would you intervene? We don't do too much bystander intervention with this younger age group. We do a lot more with the older kids because they're not sort of necessarily psychologically or physically ready to do too much intervention, but they can do simple things. So again, these very sort of exciting near-peer trainers that are providing this material to the young people. Okay, so the opportunity that MCHRI now gave us is to look at mental health as well. This was really exciting for us. We didn't include it initially because our 10 to 11-year-olds, we ran out of time on the survey to include it. They really can't sit for that long, as many of you know, right? Many of you work with this age group. 2 years later, when they had seen the survey before, they were moving it through more quickly, and then we got this additional funding that really allowed us to add these measures. So it's really exciting. And there is evidence that these kind of empowerment interventions improve mental health outcomes, primarily from North America and primarily from older age groups. So it was interesting to see if we could see this in this group. So for those of you that are familiar with these scales, we did use validated scales specific for youth, the Beck's Youth Inventory Depression and the Beck's Youth Inventory Anxiety scales, and then the Child PTSD Symptom Scale. And these three things were chosen based on, again, previous evidence suggesting that these kind of interventions may move the needle on anxiety, depression, and PTSD. So we were able to, again, kind of piggyback on this existing clusterized randomized design, and we wanted to look at two things. One, we wanted to look at the differences between boys and girls in these groups, and that's more descriptive, just understanding where these kids are at in this community. And then we obviously wanted to look between intervention and control groups at the end, because we do have this randomized approach already. So I will say preliminary results. We're still kind of finalizing data cleaning. This is all very initial, so hopefully in another few months, if folks are interested, we can fill you in on more. But boys versus girls on depression, and you'll see the gray is mild depression, and the red cardinal is severe or moderate depression. Really large difference in terms of girls reporting quite a bit more depression and quite a bit more severe, moderate or severe depression as well in this age group. And fairly high levels, although some of you may argue not that much higher than we see in other places. Anxiety was extremely high. And like just barely, you can see a p-value in the corner there, just sort of barely significant between boys and girls, but quite high in both of these groups. And then PTSD, which we expected to be very high in this community. This is a community, as we mentioned earlier, where there's a lot of violence, a lot of insecurity, ranging from personal safety insecurity, food insecurity, et cetera. So we did expect high rates of PTSD. And this is interesting. The boys had much higher levels of mild PTSD, but similar levels to the girls of severe or moderate PTSD. So because many of you know the PTSD scales both look at the symptoms, and they also, if you include both scales, look at the sort of background incidences that might lead to the PTSD. So we did look at that, and it turns out that both in terms of the mean and median, boys are experiencing about one more episode of PTSD kind of inducing things than girls. However, we know from the literature, again, North American literature for the most part, that girls are more likely to report PTSD symptoms after trauma. So there's a whole lot of untangling to do here that we haven't done yet, but I think will be really interesting. And examples of the PTSD scale: witnessing a beating, shooting, or a severely threatening situation. And in our sample, both the boys and girls, that was around 60%. That was one of the higher ones. So it gives you a sense, again, of the insecurity in these communities. Been in a bad accident was one of the lowest ones at just under 10%, and similar for boys and girls. So I'll apologize, I have a cold, so I'm going to keep nursing my tea. So overall, in our entire sample, we did not see a difference between the intervention and, I'm calling it the standard of care group, the control group, in any of these measures. But when we subbed out girls with a previous history of trauma, we saw quite a big difference. As you can see, this severe and moderate, the bottom two bars, in the intervention group was 13%, and in the standard of care group was almost 22%. So this is clearly a finding that we're going to need to dig into and try to understand what's going on there. There is, again, some other evidence that some of these interventions may decrease some of the negative health outcomes, and I think what we're seeing here is that this intervention may hold some promise in certain groups, if perhaps not overall in this entire population. So limitations. Assessments were at the end of the survey. We added them on at the end. Not every kid got to it, and I think that's probably differential because the kids that didn't get to it were probably moving through more slowly, and so I think that's something to think about, right? They could be a little bit different, or they could be just bored. And then the age group is on the younger end of the validation of these instruments. So future directions, I think I've mostly talked about. We've got a whole bunch of more analysis to do here with this data to try to tease apart these relationships a little bit more. And then we are hoping to go on and write a larger grant to kind of do some more mental health work in this group. And just lots of partners to thank, like everybody. Many organizations in Kenya, Ujamaa AHD, No Means No. The Kenyan implementation team, which is almost 100 incredibly dedicated young people. And a very large team of folks at Stanford, many of whom are in the audience today, who've really supported this work and made it possible. Thanks.
Very, very interesting paper. So how do you differentiate anxiety from legitimate fear? How do you differentiate depression from grief? And how do you know, proceeding, which fits as a mental health, looks like a mental health disorder, and which looks like a appropriate response to a very dangerous and unpredictable environment?
Yeah, absolutely. So we did not have a physician actually looking at these kids. So we are relying on these scales that I mentioned. They have all been previously validated in this age group, and several of them have actually been validated in sub-Saharan African countries as well. But it is definitely self-report, right? And so thinking about some of the kinds of questions you raised in this high-risk population is really interesting. And looking at the validation studies as well in similar high-risk populations is also pretty informative. So I think that's a great question, and it's not totally answered by the methodology.
Thank you, Clea.
Thanks.